Chapter 84. The Choice. The prophet continually spoke of paradise, and when he did so, it was as a man who sees what he describes. This impression was confirmed by many other signs, as for example when he once stretched out his hand as if to take something, and then drew it back. He said nothing, but some of those who were with him noticed his action and questioned him about it. "I saw paradise," he said, "and I reached out for a cluster of its grapes. Had I taken it, you would have eaten of it as long as the world endures." They had grown accustomed to thinking of him as one who is already in a sense in the hereafter. Perhaps it was partly for this reason that when he spoke of his death, and when he inferred indirectly, as sometimes now he did, that it might be imminent, his words made little impression on them. Moreover, despite his 63 years, he still had the stature and grace of a much younger man. His eyes were still bright, and there were only a few white hairs in his black hair. Yet on one occasion, a remark of his when he was with his wives was sufficiently ominous to prompt the question as to which of them would be the first to rejoin him in the next world. He replied, "She of the longest reach will be the soonest of you to join me," whereupon they set about measuring their arms, one against another. Presumably, though it is not recorded, Sauda was the winner of this contest, for she was the tallest of them, and in general the largest. Zainab, on the other hand, was a small woman with an arm to match. But it was Zainab who died first of them all, some 10 years later. Only then did they realize that by she of the longest reach, the Prophet had meant the most giving, for Zainab was exceedingly generous, like her predecessor of the same name, who had been called the mother of the poor. One night, not long after the Prophet had ordered preparations for the Syrian campaign, and before the army had left, he called to a freedman of his in the small hours, Abu Muwayhiba, and said, "I have been commanded to pray forgiveness for the people of the cemetery, so come you with me." They went out together, and when they reached the Baqi, the Prophet said, "Peace be on you, O people of the graves. Rejoice in your state. How much better it is than the state of men now living. Dissensions come like waves of darkest night, the one following hard upon the other, each worse than the last." Then he turned to Abu Muwayhiba and said, "I have been offered the keys of the treasuries of this world, and immortality therein followed by paradise, and I have been given the choice between that and meeting my Lord and paradise." "O dearer than my father and my mother," said Abu Muwayhiba, "take the keys of the treasuries of this world, and immortality therein followed by paradise." But he answered him, saying, "I have already chosen the meeting with my Lord and paradise." Then he prayed for forgiveness for the people of the Baqi. It was at dawn that day, or perhaps the next day, that his head ached as he had never known it to ache, but he nonetheless went to the mosque, and after leading the prayer, he mounted the pulpit and invoked blessings on the martyrs of Uhud, as if, so it was said afterwards, he were doing it for the last time. Then he said, "There is a slave amongst the slaves of God, unto whom God has offered the choice between this world and that which is with him, and the slave has chosen that which is with God." When he said this, Abu Bakr wept, for he knew that the Prophet was speaking of himself, and that the choice meant imminent death. The Prophet saw that he had understood, and telling him not to weep, he said, "O people, the most beneficent of men unto me in his companionship and in that which his hand bestows is Abu Bakr, and if I were to take from all mankind an inseparable friend, he would be Abu Bakr, but companionship and brotherhood of faith is ours until God unite us in his presence." It was on that occasion that he said, looking round at the multiple entrances into the mosque from the private houses which surrounded it, "Behold these doors that intrude upon the mosque. Let them be walled up, save only the door of Abu Bakr." Before leaving the pulpit he said, "I go before you, and I am your witness. Your tryst with me is at the pool. which verily I behold from here where now I stand. I fear not for you that you will set up gods beside God, but I fear for you this world, lest you seek to rival one another in worldly gains." From the mosque he went back to the apartment of Maimuna, whose turn it was to house him. The effort of speech to the congregation had increased his fever, and after an hour or two, wishing to let Aisha know that he was ill, he went briefly to visit her. She also was suffering from a headache, and when he entered her room she moaned, "Oh, my head!" "Nay, Aisha," said the Prophet, "it is oh, my head." But he looked at her searchingly, as if to seek some sign of mortal sickness in her face, and finding none, he said, "I wished that it might be," he meant her death, "whilst yet I was alive, that I might ask forgiveness for you, and invoke mercy upon you, and shroud you, and pray over you, and bury you." Aisha could see that he was ill, and she was alarmed at the tone of his voice, but she tried to make light of it, and succeeded in bringing a brief smile to his face. Then he repeated, "Nay, but it is oh my head," and returned to Maimuna. He tried to do as he did when he was well, and continued to lead the prayers in the mosque as usual. But his illness increased until the hour came when he could pray only in a sitting position, and he told the congregation that they also should pray seated. On his return to the apartment of the wife whose day it was, he asked her, "Where am I tomorrow?" And she named the wife to whom he would go. "And where the day after tomorrow?" he asked. Again she answered, but struck by his insistence, and sensing that he was impatient to be with Aisha, she told the other wives, whereupon they all came to him and said, "O Messenger of God, we have given our days with you unto our sister, Aisha." He accepted their gift, but was now too weak to walk unaided, so Abbas and Ali helped him to Aisha's apartment. Word came to him that there was much criticism of his choice of so young a man as Usama to command the army for the Syrian campaign, and that there was in consequence a certain slackening in the preparations. He felt the need to answer his critics, but his fever was intense, so he said to his wives, "Pour over me 7 skins of water from different wells, that I may go out unto the men and exhort them." Hafsa brought a tub to Aisha's room, and the other wives brought water, and he sat in the tub while they poured it over him. Then they helped him to dress and bound up his head, and 2 of the men took him between them to the mosque, where he sat in the pulpit and addressed those who were assembled there, saying, "O people, dispatch Usama's troop, for though you question his leadership, even as you questioned the leadership of his father before him, yet is he worthy of the command, even as his father was worthy of it." He descended from the pulpit and was helped back to Aisha's house. Preparations were hastened on, and Usama went out with his army as far as Jurf, where they encamped, about 3 miles to the north of Medina. At the next call to prayer, the Prophet felt he could no longer lead it even though he remained seated, so he said to his wives, "Tell Abu Bakr to lead the people in prayer." But Aisha feared that it would greatly pain her father to take the place of the Prophet. "O Messenger of God," she said, "Abu Bakr is a very sensitive man, not strong of voice, and much given to weeping when he recites the Quran." "Tell him to lead the prayer," said the Prophet, as if she had not spoken. She tried again, this time suggesting that Umar should take his place. "Tell Abu Bakr to lead the prayer," he reiterated. Aisha had thrown a glance of appeal at Hafsa, who now began to speak, but the Prophet silenced her with the words, "You are even as the women that were with Joseph. Tell Abu Bakr to lead the people in prayer. Let the blamer find fault, and let the ambitious aspire. God and the believers will not have it otherwise." He repeated the last sentence 3 times, and for the rest of his illness, Abu Bakr led the prayer. The Prophet lay much of the time with his head resting on Aisha's breast or on her lap. But when Fatima came, Aisha would withdraw a little to allow the father and daughter some privacy together, and at one of these visits, Aisha saw him whisper something to his daughter, who thereupon began to weep. Then he confided to her another secret, and she smiled through her tears. As she was leaving, Aisha asked her what he had said, and she answered that they were secrets she could not divulge. But later she said to her, "The Prophet told me he would die in that illness, whereof he died, and therefore I wept. Then he told me that I would be the first of the people of his house to follow him, and therefore I laughed." He suffered much pain in his illness, and one day when it was at its worst, his wife Safiya said to him, "O Prophet of God, would that I had what you have." Whereupon some of the other wives exchanged glances, and whispered one to another that this was hypocrisy. The Prophet saw them and said, "Go rinse your mouths." They asked him why, and he said, "For your maligning of your companion. By God, she speaks the truth in all sincerity." Ayman was in constant attendance, and she kept her son informed. He had already resolved to advance no further, and to remain in his camp at Jurf until God should decide. But one morning the news was such that he came to Medina and went in tears to the Prophet, who was too ill that day to speak, though he was fully conscious. Usama bent over him and kissed him, and the Prophet raised his hand, palm upwards, to ask and to receive blessings from heaven. Then he made a gesture as if to empty the contents of his hand upon Usama, who returned sadly to his camp. The next day was Monday the 12th of Rabi the Fan in the 11th year of Islam, that is, the 8th day of June in the year AD 632. Early that morning the Prophet's fever abated, and although he was exceedingly weak, the call to prayer decided him to go to the mosque. The prayer had already begun when he entered, and the people were almost drawn away from it for joy at the sight of him, but he motioned them to continue. For a moment he stood to watch them, and his face shone with gladness as he marked the piety of their demeanour. Then, still radiant, he made his way forward, helped by Fadl and by Thorban, one of his freedmen. "I never saw the Prophet's face more beautiful than it was at that hour," said Anas. Abu Bakr had been conscious of the stir throughout the ranks behind him. He knew that it could only have one cause, and that the man he now heard approaching must be the Prophet. So without turning his head he stepped back, but the Prophet placed his hand on his shoulder and pressed him forwards again in front of the congregation, saying, "Lead you the prayer," while he himself sat on the right of Abu Bakr and prayed seated. Great was the rejoicing at this apparent recovery, and not long after the prayer Usama arrived again from his camp, expecting to find the Prophet worse, and overjoyed to find him better. "Set forth with the blessings of God," said the Prophet. So Usama bade him farewell and rode back to Jurf, where he told his men to make ready for the northward march. Meantime, Abu Bakr had taken leave to go as far as Upper Medina. Already before his marriage to Asma, he had long been betrothed to Habiba, the daughter of Kharija, the Khazrajite with whom he had lodged 10 years ago on his arrival in the oasis, and they had recently been married. Habiba still lived with her family at Sunj, where he now went to visit her. The Prophet returned to Aisha's apartment, helped by Fadl and Thorban. Ali and Abbas followed them there, but did not stay long, and when they came out, some men who were passing asked Ali how the Prophet was. "Praise be to God," said Ali, "he is well." But when the questioners had gone on their way, Abbas took Ali's hand and said, "I swear I recognize death in the face of God's messenger, even as I have ever been able to recognize it in the faces of our clansmen. So let us go and speak with him. If his authority is to be vested in us, then we shall know it, and if in other than us, then will we ask him to commend us unto the people, that they may treat us well." But Ali said, "By God I will not, for if the authority be withheld from us by him, none after him will ever give it us." The Prophet had now returned to his couch and was lying with his head upon Aisha's breast, as if all his strength had been used. Nonetheless, when her brother ar-Rahman entered the room with a toothstick in his hand, she saw the Prophet looking at it in such a way that she knew he wanted it. So she took it from her brother and gnawed upon it to soften it. Then she gave it to the Prophet, who rubbed his teeth with it vigorously despite his weakness. Not long afterwards he lost consciousness, and Aisha thought it was the onset of death, but after an hour he opened his eyes. She then remembered his having said to her, "No prophet is taken by death until he has been shown his place in paradise, and then offered the choice, to live or to die." And she understood that this had been accomplished, and that he had returned from a vision of the hereafter. "He will not now choose us," she said to herself. Then she heard him murmur, "With the supreme communion in paradise, with those upon whom God has showered his favor, the prophets and the saints and the martyrs and the righteous, most excellent for communion are they." Again she heard him murmur, "O God with the supreme communion," and these were the last words she heard him speak. Gradually his head grew heavier upon her breast, until the other wives began to lament, and Aisha laid his head on a pillow and joined them in lamentation.